Hi, my name is Kevin Tace, and I want to thank you for watching this videotape. My reasons for doing this instructional videotape are simple. I want to provide a straightforward approach to painting that covers the fundamentals as well as some tricks that I've picked up over the years. When I think back to when I first started painting, I wish there was a guide like this showing me some of the pitfalls to avoid as well as some good solid paint technique. And although I've had some good teachers throughout the years, I've still had to stumble through and work out a lot of problems on my own terms. I've also seen people spend a lot of money and get very disappointed in the results just because of a few small mistakes, and maybe this would have helped them too. The concept of painting a car is fairly simple. Get your panels straight, prep it right, and follow the manufacturer's instructions in your application. But what happens in the everyday workplace can always be a different story. And the ability to work through your problems on the go can make the difference between disaster and success. Some of the things we'll be going over today are inspection, repair, priming, block sanding, masking, spray gun selection, technique, and maintenance, as well as application of base coat and clear coat, and repairs that you can do during the process. Some of the things we cover might be simple, some of them might seem familiar, and some of them are my own tricks that I've picked up. But what I really want you to take with you is the knowledge that if you use common sense, basic skills, you can end up with a paint job with great results. Now let's go to work.
The automotive repair industry is changing faster than ever today, not only to keep up with the demands of the car market, but also to keep up with the EPA, OSHA, and other federal regulations as well. The chemicals in paints are more and more toxic and dangerous to use. 20 years ago, it wasn't unusual to see someone painting or priming a car without a respirator. In fact, I've seen some demonstration videos at a refinish school showing correct methods of applying lacquer paints, and the painter wasn't even wearing a mask. With today's hardeners and clear coats, I've heard of people getting sensitized from a single overexposure and having to leave the industry because of severe allergenic reactions from even the slightest contact with fumes. I personally know a couple of people that can't be in the same room as fresh clear coat or overspray, so that to me says that the warning labels have to be taken seriously. Keeping your hands, eyes, nose, and mouth covered with approved safety equipment is absolutely mandatory. Every jobber or supply store should be able to tell you what you need to do to protect yourself. If not them, the paint manufacturers themselves will have information for you, but you have to take some responsibility and educate yourself as well. You should consider safety equipment as important as the paint itself and figure it into your budget alongside everything else. Here are some of the things that you'll need. A good quality spray mask that is rated for paint vapor, some sort of eyewear or goggles, a spray suit, gloves, and possibly a head sock if your suit doesn't cover your head. Surgical gloves are cheap, easy to work in, and give you good protection from paint and reducers. And throughout this tape, we'll be showing you how to use the safety equipment and reminding you to use it. I can't stress how important it is to be protected. Okay, lecture's over. Like any successful project, this one needs a plan. Do some research and figure out what you want to do and stick to your plan. Remember, changing your mind midstream can be expensive. Be realistic, set reasonable goals as to what you want to do. If you need a simple repaint, plan for it. If you want custom lowrider graphics and airbrush work, don't wait till you have the car in the booth to decide what you're going to do. If you do want custom work and can't do it yourself, hire someone that does it on the side, or go to your local schools and college art departments. There may be some budding Rembrandt in there dying for a chance to do a mural on your hood. My point is, plan ahead for it. Even Michelangelo used blueprints. Talk to your paint supply stores. Tell them what you're doing and ask for honest advice and direction into what you're trying to do. If they don't give you the right answers, go somewhere else. There's plenty of competition out there and you can find someone who cares what you're doing if you look. Talk to some painters. Go to some body shops and bug some people. Find out what they use and what they recommend. You may run across someone that could really help you and give you good solid advice. You may also be able to rent their booth. Line up your location and equipment ahead of time. If you can rent an existing booth, that's fine. If you can't, a homemade booth is fine too, as long as you have decent airflow and it's a safe work environment. We don't want to be scrubbing overspray off the neighbors' cars and pets. Once you have all your ducks in a row, location, color choice, spray equipment, etc., then buy your paint and clear coats. A lot of this stuff has what's called a shelf life, and buying a couple $100 worth of paint supplies to have it sit around for months on end could lead to some problems. If you don't already have spray guns, borrow them. If you can't borrow them, you might want to consider investing in an aftermarket copy of a good Sada or DeVilbiss gun. They're a fraction of the price and will hold up great with moderate use and good cleaning habits. Ask your paint supply store what gun size is recommended for the particular paint that you're spraying. Too big or too small a fluid tip could be a serious problem when it comes to spraying and really hold you up. Different types of paint require different size fluid tips, air pressure, and as well as settings. And most companies have detailed recommendations concerning gun setup, fluid tip size, and air pressure recommendations.
This is the gun that we're going to be using for the clear coats. This gun is a Sada Jet 90 conventional spray gun. I'd like to explain a little bit about the gun to you. You've got three controls on this gun. You've got a fan control, you've got a fluid control, and an air pressure control. The air pressure control we're going to leave wide open all the time because that's just for detail work and it doesn't apply to what we're doing today. This is a fluid level control. That controls the amount of fluid that's coming into the gun body and mixing with the air. Of course, your fan control controls the width of the fan coming out that's actually making your spray pattern. We're going to leave these all the way open with the fluid level control all the way out open to let the gun actually do what it's designed to do, which is atomize paint. Atomization is the process of mixing the air with the liquid, making tiny particles of paint that actually transfer onto the vehicle. We want to let the gun do what it's designed to do. These are my paint guns that I use on the job every day. What I've got is a gun that I use for sealer, I've got a gun I use for base coats, and I've got a gun that's dedicated exclusively for clear coats. I never mix them for obvious reasons. You don't want color coming into your clear coats, and you don't want clear coat gumming up your color, and you certainly don't want sealer mixing in with either one of them. So if you can afford it, dedicate a gun to each procedure that you can do. We've got other guns here. We've got a specialty gun. This is a mini jet. This is for detail work, and it's a fantastic touch-up gun. I use it every day. And what this is a low-cost knockoff of that particular gun. It's not as reliable, so I don't use it every day, but it's an excellent backup. All right, we're going to give you a rundown of some of the equipment that you're going to need for a paint job. These are paint mixing sticks. Your jobber supply will give you those for free. Same as the Bondo spreaders. These come in handy for many, many different things. We've demonstrated squeegeeing off sanding water, tucking masking tape, and all sorts of things. They're also for free. You want to get some gloves. You can either go with a lightweight glove like this or go with a solvent-proof glove like this. These don't hold up quite as well, but there's still protection for your hands while you're spraying and while you're mixing paint. Very important to protect yourself at all times. We've got a set of goggles that seal to the face. They're not 100% protection, but they're good protection to start with. Got some 1.5-inch masking tape, several rolls of 3/4-inch masking tape, and don't skimp on quality when you're buying masking tape. It really pays to spend just a little bit extra and get good quality products. It'll pay for itself in the long run. Also, strainers. When you ask for strainers, ask for fine strainers. And since they give them out for free, usually when you buy a couple of $100 worth of paint and equipment, use 2 at a time. A particle as small as 1 micron, which is about the size of the sharp end of a pin, will transfer from on the flat surface of a paint job and show through to where you can actually feel it with your fingertips by the time your paint job is done. So it can make a huge difference once you've stacked paint on top of it. If you want a recommended spray suit, this is one without a hood. See, the guy looks quite a lot like myself, but except for the mustache. We're using a painter's sock to cover the hair and cover the face and neck area. All right, this is your best friend. This is a timer. This locks you in to waiting the correct time between coats and for letting your materials flash off properly. Your time perception goes haywire when you're in the paint booth, so you need to rely on something that's going to tell you what time it is. I like to use the mixing buckets that are the graduated mixing scales on the side. It takes the guesswork out of mixing. You don't have to mix by a paint paddle, and they're already pre-measured in many, many different ratios. Here's a larger one. If you don't have access to those, you can always use your Pyrex kitchenware. Now this is a product that PPG has. It's called DX103. They call it a multi-prep. What I use this for is a anti-static spray. We use that between coats. We use that before the final wipe down. And if you don't have access to this, go to your drugstore and get rubbing alcohol. It does the same thing, or almost the same thing. Got a water mister. And we go back into what these are. Is they're peel away decals that show your coverage, and you're going to put one of those or something like it on the window, and as you're painting, you're building up your coats, you can tell if you've got full coverage or not. Clear coat hardener, final wipe solvent, base coat reducer, we've got clear coat reducer, and we've got a 2K high solid clear.
The first thing you need to do is make sure you have a clean car to work on. This should happen the day before to make sure the car is good and dry before masking and priming. Cleaning the car should include a trip to the coin-operated car wash to get the engine compartment, wheels, tires, bumpers, and as much of the underside of the car as you can reach as clean as possible. You'd be surprised what kind of dirt can show up in your paint from those places. It's also important to wash the outside with a good strong soap like a dishwashing soap with a high pH value, because it helps to strip wax and grease from all the nooks and crannies. If you know for sure that you're going to paint the whole car, you can use Comet or Ajax and scrub with the rag to really get the surface clean. That also helps to remove the bugs. It's very important not to use tire dressing or vinyl top dressing of any kind during the prep process. Most of them contain silicone and will react with your paint, causing you major problems during the painting.
What we want to do now is make sure that we've got a good visual inspection of the vehicle and just look at it really closely and make sure that you point out and notate any damage. It may seem like minor damage, but if you paint over top of it, it really is going to show through the final top coats. And we're spending a lot of money on paint. We want to make sure we're thorough. Now this is a spot that you're not going to see from 10 feet away, possibly not even up close, but underneath is a place that these big wide tires throw up a lot of rocks, so we get a lot of damage here. Consequently, we want to be conscious of these areas, especially in these type of cars. What we've got here is a little bit of stress crack or stress damage from this plastic urethane bumper. That's just age, that's just curbs, things like that that cause that type of damage, but you want to be conscious of it because a fresh paint job will sink down into those cracks and show it up more than what it is now. You want to look really close for all the stone chips. Some of these have been touched up so they're harder to see. But it pays to take your time in the front end and make sure that you've seen everything. And use your hands. Don't be afraid to feel the car. Something like this right here, you can feel it with your fingernail. Chances are it's going to show up really bad through the new paint, so we want to take care of things like that.
What we're doing now is sanding with a 6-inch DA sander. Since we're sanding for primer, we can go a little bit more aggressive, and we're using a 220 grit. What we're trying to do with the DA is to level the chips and scratches so our primer can better fill in and repair the damage. Now on the bumper where we have our stress cracks, you want to remove all the cracked paint but not break into the plastic bumper. There's no metal to tell you when to stop, so be careful not to cause yourself more work than you have to. It's a lot easier to spend a little time removing emblems and moldings than it is to work around them. You could damage them or dip into the paint around them. This also lets you prep the whole surface and not have to worry about if your paint will stick around the edges. When you use a DA or dual action sander, never tilt it up and use the edge. Keep it flat and apply light even pressure and let the sandpaper do the work for you. To protect your moldings that you can't remove, use masking tape. Use several layers because the sandpaper is quite aggressive and might burn through just one. This can save you a lot of money in the long run. And if you're working with fiberglass or plastic, remember that you can't prep it like metal. You can go too far and sand right through the gel coat, making waves and divots. It's very important to read your surface and keep a close eye on what you're doing. Here's a tip. Don't throw away those worn out DA pads. The grit in the center is still pretty good and makes a good hand sanding disc. Go back over your surfaces by hand and sand any places you've missed with your DA or shiny spots you left behind. Remember, primer or paint won't stick if it's not sanded. After the parts are sanded and blown off, it's time to wipe the panels clean with our solvent. It only takes a few seconds to put on a pair of gloves and protect yourself anytime you're working with solvent-based products. Use a two-rag method to use this stuff. Wax on, wax off. This step makes sure all the sanding dust is wiped off the panel to be primed. You should wipe in one direction using a wet towel to lift out the dust and your dry one to remove the excess solvent and dirt. This is the same technique you should use throughout the process, and your lint-free towels are available from your jobber. This step also gives you one more opportunity for inspecting your work and catching anything you might have missed along the way. Here's another trick. Use a spot putty to fill in any gouges or deep chips. Mix up the putty and hardener and apply with a single-edge razor blade to the places you need it. Give it plenty of time to dry and come back with the sanding block and level off your spots. Your blocking technique is real light when you're doing this. Use the leading edge of the block to make sure it's flat when you're done. You can use this in all kinds of situations right up until you're ready to paint if you have to. Once you're satisfied that your panels are sanded and prepped properly, it's time to mask. Now, in order not to be really boring, we're going to fast forward through the process. Masking for primer is just as important as masking for paint. With catalyzed high-build primers, overspray can be difficult or impossible to remove from plastic and painted parts. You can see we're using reverse taping on a lot of the edges. What this does is eliminate a hard edge from your primer if you happen to prime up to your paper. It makes it a lot easier to block sand and is less likely to show through your paint job. You've got to assume that primer and paint will go anywhere that's not covered up, so do a thorough job masking and check your panels again while you're at it. Remember, nobody sees it all the first time around, and it's never too late to go back and do some last-minute touch-ups. Choose a good quality, high-build, catalyzed primer surfacer. Your paint job is only as good as the foundation under it, and this particular primer doubles as a sealer using a different mixing ratio, making it a versatile all-around product. Again, anytime we're dealing with paint-related products, we use our gloves to avoid skin contact. Follow the instructions with your mixing ratio. It's really simple and easy using the see-through mixing cups with the markings on the side. This primer surfacer uses a 5:1:1 ratio. That's 5 parts primer, 1 part hardener, and 1 part reducer, but your particular primer may vary. And stir your components well. They've got to be mixed together in order to cross-link properly. Stir it up until you're sure that it's mixed together. And use your strainers. Never mix into the cup of the gun. It's not accurate, and you can't filter out the debris from the primer. Remember to clean out your mixing cups right away so they can be used over again as well. I always test the spray pattern on the masking paper, never on the car. Make sure it's even, and if it's not, you've got a chance to troubleshoot. We always use a tack rag no matter where we're spraying. The cleaner the better. You'll always get a cleaner job using one. You unfold it completely, ball it up, and gently tack your surfaces. You don't want to push too hard, or you'll leave a residue from the rag itself. You can see when we prime, we make smooth, even passes. Put down a wet coat and leave it. Never double coat. This causes all kinds of problems like runs and solvent trapping. And use a 50% overlap on each pass. Work your way from top to bottom. Consistency is the key here, as everything you do will affect the way your paint job looks. Keep a good 6 to 7 inches from the panel with your gun, too. And don't worry if you see flaws and scratch swells in the primer. That's what it's all about, and it will usually sand out. And your guide coat will also show you where to sand. And you can take your time. Most catalyzed primers have a 2 to 3 hour pot life, so you don't have to be in a hurry or try and get it out of the gun fast. Rushing while spraying anything is a huge no-no and will cause you trouble. With this particular primer, it requires a 10-minute flash time between coats, but always check with your manufacturer's instructions. With high solid primers, 2 good wet coats is usually all you need. If you start stacking material on, you'll end up trapping solvents and giving yourself headaches. Another important tip I want to give is while you're spraying, always look at the panel, not at your gun. Try and find the reflection of a light in the paint or the primer to watch while you're putting it on, and look off just from one side. Once you master this technique, you can use it on every step of the process, especially in spraying your clear coats. A guide coat is a light mist of a contrasting color on top of your last coat of primer surfacer. Some people use black lacquer paint in a separate gun, some use enamel, but I prefer the spray bomb type. It's cheap and there's no gun cleanup involved. If you can't find spray guide coat, black primer from any department store works well too. Remember to spray your guide coat before your primer dries so it doesn't just sit on top of the surface but actually sinks down into it.
Now that we've got our priming done, it's time to block sand the finish. Now what that means, you're taking a block that's a level surface and flattening out your primer and leveling out the primer. Now the reason we've done this guide coat will become very clear really quickly. When you do your blocking, you can see right away that the guide coat stays in the low parts and quickly gets sanded off the high parts, showing the imperfections. Theoretically, once your guide coat is gone, your surface is flat. And you notice the blocking technique that I'm using. I'm not going front to back. I'm always at a 45-degree angle. This is called cross blocking. The reason you want to do this is because you're taking advantage of the flat edge of the block instead of the linear edge that's running, and it would possibly groove the panel out. So you want to make an X pattern and travel with it as you go. This also allows you to go over top of contours, curves in the body. Now I'm demonstrating this without a mask on, but always wear a particle mask. I've got a good one here. You don't have to go this elaborate. They make other ones that are a little bit more inexpensive, but you know, I chose to protect my lungs and get something like this. So let's get started. We've gotten to a place here that we're really close to an edge. So we want to take our masking tape again and protect our moldings. This may seem like a waste of tape, but then again, it's just being careful on the front end so you don't have to buy a customer one later or buy yourself one later. Now we've seen how the blocks work, but in case you don't want to go out and buy a set of sanding blocks, here's a trick that I've learned. What you can do is take your paint paddles, your stir sticks, you take the paint paddle and wrap it with the sandpaper. We're using 180 grit, which is quite aggressive, but you've got some bend and some give with the paint paddle, so you can take it around a curve and contour to your body. Even panels that might look flat are not necessarily flat.
When you're blocking your panels, you're using smooth and even pressure on the surface of the whole block. And as your guide coat is sanded off, your scratches and your imperfections in your surface will show themselves to you, and the guide coat will actually tell you where to sand. A great way to test your blocking and your bodywork is to wet your panels with your final wipe. Stand back and take a look. Once you're sure your bodywork It's time to final sand. Before we do this though, we've got to make sure that our edges are protected. Anything that you don't want sand scratches in, cover it up. Lubricate your sanding water with a little bit of dish soap. Stir it around. What this does is it allows your paper not to clog, and it lubricates it a little bit, lets it move easier across the surface. It's easier on your hands as well. For our final sanding, we're using 400 grit. You fold your big sheet in half and fold the halves into thirds. This allows the paper to adhere to itself where it won't slip out of your hands, and it gives you 3 sections to use once they're worn out. If you trust your hand sanding technique not to groove the panel, you can go ahead and use the pad of your hand, but if you don't, get a sanding block like a foam sanding block and sandwich that in between your paper. It's just a little bit of extra insurance, making sure that you don't groove your panel out. You can use your blocking techniques, or you can sand in a circular motion. What I choose to do is sand in a circular motion. That way there's no linear marks, even if the corner of the sandpaper or some piece of grit gets caught in between it. And then again, we're not bearing down on the panel. We're letting the sandpaper do the work for us. Lubricate your sanding paper. Here's another use for your Bondo spreaders. Once you've got your panel sanded, or you think you've got it sanded, squeegee the water off and check it. After you're through sanding, get one of your Scotch-Brite abrasive pads and go to town. The harder the area is to sand, the more important it is to sand it, and these pads are great for getting in all the cracks and corners. Even if you think you've got it, do it again. There's no such thing as a car being sanded too much. When you're through sanding, give the car a thorough, hood open, doors open washing to remove all the sanding sludge from the nooks and crannies. Make sure your car is dry before you start to mask. It really pays off in the end result if you go ahead and take the time to remove your mirrors and all the emblems and moldings. Some of these mirrors are impossible to tape up around, so the best thing to do is just to remove them completely. Make sure you go back over the spots with your Scotch-Brite pad that are still shiny from where you couldn't reach it with the sandpaper before. It's also a great time to check over your car one more time and make sure you haven't missed anything. What we're going to do now is clean the surface of the car with our final wipe one more time to make sure there's as little dust as possible, and also to clean any grease or oil that may have gotten onto the sanded surfaces. It's very important that we don't touch the sanded surfaces of our car ever. Your hands have an oil that continuously excretes from your skin and can cause hot spots, fish eyes, and other problems. If you have to lean on the car to sand or to mask, lean on the glass, or you can always wear gloves. To do a good job masking, you have to think like the paint. What I mean by that is you have to look at all the parts that you don't want overspray on and assume that the paint will do anything it can to get in there. Paint will travel into the smallest, tightest places, even the ones that you can't see, because it's under a lot of pressure right out of the gun. Here's an example of back taping or tape rolling. What this does is it lets us use the inside edge of our wheel opening to mask off the wheel opening itself. This stops overspray from getting on the disc brakes, and it also stops trash from flying up. We're doing the same thing on our door edges. We do it on both sides, and this gives us also the elimination of tape lines. Anything you can do to protect your jams and protect the places that you don't want overspray on, go ahead and do it. Spend a little bit more time masking, and believe me, you'll thank yourself later. Make sure all your glass surfaces are covered. Make sure that dust can't get out of any cracks or crevices into your paint. Here's another use for your Bondo spreaders. They have a great straight edge, and they make it very easy to tuck your masking tape in. We need to prep our paint booth as well. Even if you're fortunate enough to be in a downdraft booth, you still need to worry about the floor and the walls. Take every precaution necessary to get your work environment as clean as possible. Dirt and trash in a paint job doesn't come from just one place. It comes from every place. Everything you do or do not do is going to affect your outcome one way or another, and believe me, getting rid of it after the car has been sprayed is much harder than before. Make sure there's no debris in the corners, and always mist the floor down if you can. I use a garden sprayer and a dust control spray. If you can't have access to this, just plain water will do just fine. Put a little bit of soap in it too, where it'll hang on to the floor. Since we're almost ready to shoot, I want to spend a little bit of time on spray equipment. It's a good idea to become familiar with your guns. Take them apart and make sure all the air and fluid passages are good and clean. This will help you to troubleshoot if you run into problems down the road.
I want to explain trigger control a little bit. When you depress the trigger, about the first 30% is just air. As you get about halfway, it starts letting the fluid in and opening up to actually atomize the paint. This is very important when you're making a pass. You don't start full trigger all the time. You start with the air and then you ease in. And that gives you control. Especially doing detail work, you can feather into the edges, allowing the paint to do the work. This is a diagram of how the spray pattern is supposed to look up against a parallel surface. This distance between your gun tip and the surface should be 6 to 7 inches at all times for the paint that we're using, but check with your manufacturer for the recommendations that they have. It's very important to keep your gun parallel to the surface. That way your atomized paint falls out in an even pattern and you won't be heavy on one side or the other. What happens when you change the angle of your gun, and of course this is exaggerated, but what you get here is the pattern is the same. What you get is a heavy buildup on this side tapering off into dry spray here. And it's obvious what that's going to do. It's going to be inconsistent, it's going to promote runs, and it's not going to give you the even film that you want, because you want to try and emulate a factory paint job. And what you're going to get with this is you're going to promote runs. It's just going to be an uneven texture. So what you want to do at all times is keep your gun parallel to the surface. Okay, what I've got here, I'd like to talk about air pressure. What this is, it's a simple T that you can get at any auto parts store or hardware store. And this is the cheapest gauge I could buy. This whole setup costs about $14. But it's very, very important, because the gun pressure that the manufacturers talk about is pressure at the gun. It's not at the gauge on the wall or at the beginning of the air hose. It's air pressure that you've got going to your gun body. Now what this does is it tells me at the end of the air hose where my pressure's at. And it gives an accurate reading as to where the pressure is. As you can see on the regulator on the wall, you've got divisions as to what your air pressure is at the regulator. Well, that means nothing. You shouldn't pay attention to that at all. 40 pounds here is not 40 pounds at the gun. So what we're going to do is read our gauge and make a mark where 40 pounds is at the gun. We'll make another mark where 45 is at the gun, because those are the two air pressures that we're going to be using with the particular products we have today. I'd like to talk a little bit about spray gun technique. Technique is very, very important in the application of the clear coats and base coats. It's something that's very, very easy to forget, and it's easy to get lazy. What I'm talking about is gun distance, the distance between your gun and the panel that you're shooting. It's critical that it's the same and parallel throughout the whole vehicle's surface. If you've seen any training films, the robots that paint the cars in the factories, they're programmed to stay the same distance from the surface or the top coat surface that you're shooting. What you want to remember is to not get fooled into the vehicle's body lines and keep a parallel surface. Now also your spray pattern comes down in a V. If you're tilting one way or the other, what you're going to end up with is a heavier side of your paint pattern, and that's going to cause mottling in the base coats, it's going to cause running in the clear coats, and an inconsistent film, an inconsistent surface, and it's not going to be what you want. So you want to make sure that your pattern is going straight down and your gun is directly parallel. Now I like these gravity feed guns because they're very well balanced. They don't tax your wrist as much in keeping them parallel like this. And by the time you walk around this car, you'll know what I'm talking about as far as wrist fatigue. Now also, you want to make sure that you're in a linear pattern and use your wrist, and when you get to the end of your panel, don't sweep. What you want to do is spray past the panel and then cut off. Come in with a little bit of air, come into your panel, and then cut off. When you sweep, what you're doing is you're misting, and it's getting an inconsistent pattern towards the end. All right, now we're going to talk about overlap. Now what overlap is when you make a pass, when you come back on it, you lap it over halfway, and that's called a 50% overlap. So let's say that these two lines represent your first pass, and you've done your duty, made a nice parallel pass, and your next one, if it's a 50% overlap, is going to start in the middle of that pass and overlap onto the next one. So you're coming down here for the first, coming up here for the second. What that does is gradually step the paint across and even out the surface, making it seamless. I want to talk about the three basic grips for your gun. Now this applies to any style gun, not just the gravity-fed guns. What you've got is a grip for the side panels. You've got a grip which is a little relaxed, a little further back for your top panels. And you've got a grip for your rocker panels. And you're using different parts of your fingers to depress the trigger in each one. And what that allows you to do is not cock your wrist and not have to strain your arm to get coverage on these bottom parts. It's very much easier to grab it by the top, pull the trigger down, and sweep it under the bottom. And the easier it is, the more relaxed you're going to be doing it, and the more you can concentrate on actual coverage. So once again, we'll come up to the top. You've got your forward grip for your horizontal surfaces. You've got your side grip for your sides. And you've got your bottom grip for the bottom and undercurved parts, which are very, very important on this car. The rockers sweep way underneath the car. All right, this is what I call a dry run-through. What this is going to do is show us where to stop and where to start on an all-over paint job. What you don't want to do is start at a certain place and work your way around the car, coming back to that place. What that does is promote dry spray where you started, and it doesn't give you a clear pattern on how to proceed the vehicle. We've got a technique that I call leapfrogging that will allow you to keep the paint wet and as you work your way up to the front of the car. Now what we'll do is start right here. Start on the roof, making nice even passes, paying attention to our gun distance, and with our other hand making sure our air hose is out of the way. And you stop and you take your time and move your hose, making sure it doesn't get hung or kinked on anything, and you take up where the paint is wet, right from the middle, and pull your way back across that panel. Again, keeping very close attention to your gun distance and your overlap. And you work your way down the quarter panel, down your dog leg, down the back of the fascia, and do your edges. You come across the deck. You can either split this up one way or the other, like we did the roof, or you can come across it. This deck is short, so we're doing it the other way. And you come from the bottom up on your rear bumper, making nice even passes, not getting trapped into the little nooks and crannies of the body. If you're overlapping correctly, your spray technique will get the paint in where it needs to be. Coming down from the quarter panel, working our way down, and don't be afraid to get on your knee and look at what you're doing. So it separates the men from the boys. You got to get down and get dirty. Come back down using your other grips. Come back down using your grips. Then, only then, do you come back for your edges. Now the reason for this is when you come across a panel, you've already got a lot of paint inside this inside perimeter of the wheel opening. What you don't want to do is coat it first, because that's getting overspray up to about here on your panel. And then when you come back down across it, you make 2 or 3 passes, you've got excessive film build around that edge. So what you do is come back down the panel and then take a look at it and see what you need to paint. And always do your edges afterwards. So now, we've done this quarter panel, we leapfrog to the other side of the car. And again, you've got plenty of time, folks. You don't have to hurry. This paint is not going to dry on you. It takes 8 weeks to cure properly, and it ain't going to dry on you in the time that you're making a coat in the paint booth. So now we stop at our rocker panel, and we work our way slowly and evenly up the door, changing our grip when it gets uncomfortable. See, that's your guide. This should be easy. The clear should flow out of the gun, and it should be comfortable to do. We come back to this door using our rocker panel grip, making nice even passes. You'll feel the point when you need to change the gun. Making your side grip. Very nice. Now don't be afraid to paint your masking paper either. It collects overspray, and if you have too much dry spray on it, what you'll get is it blowing out during your clear coat. So now we've come here, we're leapfrogging again, only this time we're coming around the front because our air hose won't reach. And we're picking up on our wet edges down here. Now we start at the bottom of the fender again, working our way up. Catch the bottom of the fascia, work our way up, come to the side of the fender, finish our fender, catch our edge, change our grip. We're starting at the top. Now the tendency is to want to slow down and make it slick, make it real nice and shiny on the top. You want to keep your gun speed consistent throughout the whole paint job. At the same time, you want to make sure that you're getting it on wet enough so you don't get excessive texture and excessive orange peel. You work your way to the middle, keeping care to keep your air hose out of the paint. Pick up again from the middle. Never, never start in the middle. You always end up with dry spray. This is definitely the technique to do. Different people have different variations on this, but if you talk to any professional painter that does it for a living, they'll tell you that you do the push-pull method. Absolutely. You're coming back down, catching your edges, change your grip, catch your edges, wet your dry spray that you've got on the front of the nose. Make it nice and easy. Now in these crannies, you don't need to hose in around your edges. Make a nice even pass over top of it. Let the overspray die and take a look. See where you haven't covered. If you got a bit of dry in that area, use half trigger and missed it. Come back, do this side the same way. Check it. Not with your hand. Check it for dry spray, and if you've got a little bit of dry spray, miss it. Same with your door handles on your doors. Now here, we've got a lot of area underneath the fascia. Don't be afraid to lay down on the dirt if you have to. What we're after here is consistency and even coverage. And whatever it takes to get there, that's what gets the job done.
All right, one more time we're going to be wiping the car down. It's very important to keep the surface of the car clean. This just gives you a little bit more insurance to make sure that your paint job is going to be contamination free. We're going to be suited up and dressed for each of the 3 steps of our paint job. There's no such thing as too much protection. A sealer is an excellent way to ensure that you've got all your sand scratches covered and filled. It can also make the difference between primer edges showing and not showing, but the most important reason to use a sealer is to give yourself an even surface to lay down your color. And believe it or not, even though it's one more step, this may actually save you time and money. If you've chosen a transparent color such as a metallic blue or red, you'll end up using less base color to get total coverage and hiding than if you were trying to cover up primer spots and sand-throughs. This has to do with the contrast that the edges of a primer spot give you. If you can, choose a sealer as close as possible to the top coat color, or use a sealer that you can tint with your actual color that you're using. K36 is an excellent example of a tintable sealer. We've tinted ours with a white base coat. You can also look at a sealer as a practice coat and a good way to see if you can reach everything and to see that everything's covered up under your masking paper. I've chosen to use PPG products throughout this video for several reasons. Number one, it's the best, most user-friendly system I've used in the field and a great all-around product from start to finish. And it's what I use every day in my paint shop. Although I use PPG, if you have another preference, that's great, but I do think it's very important to stay with one manufacturer from start to finish. Use a system. And use high-quality products. Most paint lines will warranty their systems for product failure as long as you use their product all the way through. And it's also an easy way to troubleshoot if you run into problems along the way. Don't forget to set your timer. This sealer takes a 20-minute flash time before you can top coat. Tacking between coats is an excellent opportunity to check your surface one more time. If you feel any trash or imperfections in it, you can go ahead and sand them out now. Using our 103 or our rubbing alcohol for an anti-static spray is an excellent idea on this fiberglass. The base coat is the first part of a two-stage finish. The only real purpose it serves is to provide color. There are no UV screeners in base coat, and if it's left on its own, it deteriorates very fast. It's important to have smooth, even coats of base because everything you put on top of it will exaggerate the texture. Use your 50% overlap technique and spray with an almost wet coat. This means a good coat but not hosed on. Pay attention to proper reducer selection and to the temperature of your environment. Just a few degrees difference will greatly affect how well your color lays down. It's very important to have complete coverage on your color before you start to clear. If you see a thin spot in the base coat on your first coat of clear, it's virtually impossible to correct unless it's extremely small. Once we start to clear, there's no turning back, and you can't decide to put more color coats on after the first coat of clear or mix color with your clear. If you do, you're headed for trouble. Trust me on this one. There are several ways to check if you've got coverage. One is just to look closely once your base is flashed off to a hand-dry state. If you have shadows to deal with, get a drop light and do a hands and knees visual inspection. Don't be afraid to get down on the floor and look. Keep in mind what this car is going to look like on a lift or at the tire store or mechanic shop if your paint's thin at the rockers. Another way is to take your solvent wipe and wet your panel like we did while checking our bodywork. This will give you a real good idea of what it would look like under the clear coat. And if you're using metallic color, you can see if your metallics are even and splotchy or mottled. Check it with the panel wet, but make sure you wipe it all off before it dries so it doesn't cause you problems with the clear. Be careful not to check until your base is dry enough. Some reds and whites are bad about looking covered until they dry a little, and they can fool you. A good rule to follow is that if you're not sure about coverage, wait your flash time and give it another coat. There's no harm in being sure, and even if you've got to go and buy some more base coat, it's a lot cheaper than a repaint. Find your flash times and set your timer again. Start your timer from the point at which you stop your last coat. Take your time while you're spraying and concentrate on your gun distance from your panel and your overlap. Remember that you're watching your panel instead of your gun, making sure that you got smooth, even coverage. Pay attention to your masking paper as well. If you need to make a repair, take your time, stop and make the repair. The paint should feel as though it's flowing out of the gun and not like you're pushing it out. You may have to adjust your fluid control or even your reducer selection. If it starts to look dry, make your adjustments and start again. And remember not to get fooled into your body lines. Make smooth, even strokes and try and divide your car into sections. And paint past your panel breaks. This allows you to get wet coverage on the ends of the panel. great feature of this base coat is the fact that you can repair it every step of the way. If you get your hose in a panel or something like an insect or dirt falls in it, simply wait a few minutes until it's dry to touch, do your repair, and continue on. If there's a mark or discoloration in the base, gently scuff it with 600 grit sandpaper lubricated by your final wipe, and then dust another coat of color on until you've achieved hiding. Use a good quality high solids clear, such as PPG's 2002. It sprays great and stays looking the way you lay it down. With that in mind, let me say this. Since this is a 2-coat clear, your first coat has to be just as smooth and even as your last. In the old enamel days, we used to put down a tack coat or a dry coat to give the others something to sit on. There's not a need for that now with these new paint systems, and if you lay your first coat down lumpy, your second one will look lumpy too, no matter what you do or how well you shoot it. What high solid means is that the more of the paint that's mixed up in your gun actually stays on the panel that you spray it on, and less of it evaporates and goes out into the atmosphere. Lacquers used to be, depending on how you mix them, 12 to 15% solids by volume, whereas the urethane clear that we're using now is approximately 43% solids by volume. If you think about that in terms of a comparison in a quart cup, it's a huge difference, and it also means that your paint now has less of a chance to even itself out while it's wet, and that the application affects the results even more. It's also very important to keep your 6 to 7 inches gun distance away from the panels, and as well as keeping up with your 50% overlap, just like the base coats, just like your primer coats, and just like your sealer. This makes sure that you don't stack your paint and run it, or trap solvents while you're spraying. Another plug on safety? Sure. The clears are by far the most dangerous to use. Therefore, it's important to make sure you've got a good fit on your mask and that you don't smell paint fumes even in the slightest amount. Isocyanates are odorless and invisible, so if you can smell paint resins and thinner while you're spraying, then you can be sure you're getting exposed to the bad stuff. And wear your goggles every time too. We've got a 10-minute flash time between our coats of clear. Remember, consistency is the key. Relax and focus on the job that you're doing. Remember to paint past and over top of your lights and handles. You'd be surprised how much coverage you get when you let the paint do the work. And only dust in your edges if you have to. Wait for your overspray to dry and look. Get yourself into a comfortable position where you can see what you're doing, and use your light reflection to guide you and watch the clear laying down on the panel. Mind your 50% overlap as well. You can see how nice the clear coats look when they're laid down on a good foundation. Now that we've got the car painted, we're going to try and see if we can see some imperfections, little pieces of trash that have fallen in the paint. I'll show you how to deal with this place in particular. This is a drip with something dark in the middle of it. We're going to show you how to remove that, and basically you can take this and use this technique and approach on a run if you happen to have a run, or have a run that you want to take out of a panel. But first I want to show you something else. When I told you to get extra Bondo spreaders when you got your supplies, this is another excellent use for that. What you're going to do is you'll be using this for the squeegee, but you want to prep the end because you've got a soft film and the edge might possibly put scratches in it rather than help you take them out. So what you want to do is take some of your sandpaper, wet it just a little bit, and just dress the edge, making it smooth. Now that you've done that, you're ready to go ahead and you don't have to worry about scratches. You've got a single edge razor blade that help you with trash nibs, little lumps like this. But run your hands over the finish, and with your eyes and your hands you'll be able to see and feel
anything that you possibly want to get rid of. For instance, there's some airborne trash that's fallen in it up here, plus this spot. Now what we've got here, like I said before, it's a little lump. And what you can do, you've got to be extremely careful doing this, not only so you don't cut yourself, but so you don't gouge the edges into the paint. But this is a technique that I've learned on how to deal with runs and things like this. What you're doing is you're basically planing the high spot off. You can go as slow or as fast as you want, however you feel confident. If you can hear what I'm doing, what you're doing is leveling that surface out. You can take a different angle. And you're taking the top layer of that high spot off. And I'm not applying much pressure. I'm letting the sharpness of the blade do the work for me. I'm not digging in with the edge. I'm laying the razor blade on the surface flat. And you'll see results really quickly. All right. Now we've got it leveled out. We're dealing with two types of sandpaper here, or two grits. We've got a 1200 grit and we've got a 2000 grit. I use the McGuire's paper because it's made extremely well. The grit is deposited evenly over the surface, and it's just a really high quality paper. It's designed to be used wet, and it will last you forever. What we're going to do is fold our 1200 grit into thirds, lubricate. I'm using just a little bit of soap in the spray bottle to lubricate the sanding water. I'm going to find our spot. We lubricate. And you sand in a circular motion using very little pressure, just some fingertip pressure. When you think you want to check, you squeegee your water off. Take a look. You need to go a little bit further with this. All right, now you can see that our dark spot's already completely gone, and we've leveled out the surface to the point to where we're almost ready to polish. We're going to step it up, use the 2000 grit, which you could polish out the 1200 grit scratches. It's just going to take you longer. You've got enough film build on your fresh clear coat to withstand that and not burn through if you're careful, but the 2000 just makes your job easier. We're sanding in a circular motion again. What this does is it creates scratches in a circular pattern instead of a linear pattern, and it makes it easier for your buffing wheel to take them out. Since your buffing wheel is usually traveling clockwise, it's going in the same direction as the scratches. All right, now we've got our spot completely leveled. We've got the dark spot out of it, and we've got it completely sanded flat, ready to buff.
Color sanding or ultrafining used to be a regular part of painting in the lacquer days. With the advent of enamels and then urethanes, its role has changed over the years. We used to sand between coats of paint over and over again to give the finish depth and gloss. Now the depth is engineered into the finish itself, so what we color sand for now mostly is to get rid of small imperfections such as lint and airborne trash that has fallen into the wet clear coat. However, if you want a show finish, you can sand and re-clear the entire vehicle. Or some people opt for extra coats of clear the first time around to give room for aggressive sanding and buffing and leveling. The results are more expensive but very nice. Keep light pressure and a low speed on your polisher. This and a little bit of misted water keeps your panel cool and allows the compound to do the work. After you've compounded all your sand scratches out, change to your intermediate compound and your softer pad. This step eliminates fine scratches and swirls left behind by the compound. Use the same techniques all the way through. Keep your speed low and let the compounds do the work for you. And keep the buffer parallel to your panel. Never use the edge. It can cause burn-throughs and smudges in the compound. keep on buffing until all of your compound has disappeared, but don't dry buff. This will cause you more problems than it will solve. The final step is a machine glaze to put a final gloss and eliminate micro scratches, and it gives us a mirror shine. Always wait about 8 weeks before you wax your fresh paint. It can interfere with the curing process. You can see what kind of a difference a little bit of buffing makes. It can turn a very good paint job into a great paint job.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the tape and got a lot out of it. If you need some more information, look us up on the internet. We've got our own website. Until then, happy painting.
Do that again. You look right up the camera.
Oh.
You can't talk about that now, Stone, can you?
Making nice even passes, paying attention to your gun distance. Look what I'm doing. I've got this ball of tape stuck to the paint gun for the whole thing. Mm-hmm. When I first started painting, I wish there was a guide to help me through some of the pitfalls and
Avoid. I wish the guide pitfalls avoid as well as good.
Okay, I'm going to have to practice through this. Hi, my name is Kevin Tates, and I want to thank you for watching this videotape. My reasons for doing this are simple. I want to provide a straightforward approach to painting that contains, what is that word?
Covers?
That covers, okay.
Slow down just a little bit.
The tongue, the teeth, the lips, tip of the tongue, the teeth, the lips. La 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 la, mo 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 me 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 ma 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 mo mo mo. Some of what we're going to be covering today is inspection, repair, drive-by shootings, process. Some of the things might seem simple to you, some might be familiar. Also, crap. I was on a roll. Let me try it again. Simple, some might be familiar, and some are my own tricks that I've provided, that I've learned through. Some of these things might seem simple, some might be familiar. Some of them are Well, we hope you've got a lot out of this tape today. If you need more information, look us up on the internet. We've got our own website. Until then, happy painting.